Hello and welcome to today's upload. Today we're going to look at the poem Remains by Simon Armitage. So we are doing an analysis of Remains. In this video we will look at the poem, we'll read through the poem, we'll look at the language techniques, the structure techniques that are used throughout, which will help you in your GCSEs. So firstly, Remains. It's wrote by Simon Armitage. Simon Armitage, very popular in the GCSE anthologies. His poems always seem to appear, and the reason for that is he writes with such good, clear structure. He fills his poetry with language techniques. He utilises these in all his works really well. They're really good poems for analysis. So this poem Remains. It's from a collection called the Not Dead Collection, which was a collection of stories from soldiers or ex-soldiers, people who had been at war and came home, and they were retelling their stories. So Remains was based on one story from a soldier in the Iraq War. He was a machine gunner. The Iraq War was 2003. First thing we do in poems. Now, if we look at the quick wins that I've uploaded on my channel, there's lots of short videos with snippets of what we need to look at, helping us answer our questions in our English language and English lit exams. So one of the things that we've mentioned earlier, and I will repeat myself in this one because we are doing a detailed analysis, is when we get a poem, the first thing I think you should do, and this is what I was taught at university. I went to Manchester University and I had one fantastic lecturer of poetry. I studied poetry and Shakespeare, and he said just look at the poem. Just look at what it looks like on a piece of paper before you even read it. It's really good advice. I then went on and studied English at Durham University. So in two universities, Manchester and Durham, studying poetry, the similar advice was there. We look at the poem first. Look at the shape of it. This poem jumps out at me. We have lots of stanzas. The stanzas all are very regimental. They're all very military. They're about equal. There's 4 lines in each stanza. Is this a reflection of the military theme that Simon Armitage wants to put across? When we have a stanza of 4 lines, we call that a quatrain. 6 lines, sestet, lots of different names for lots of different stanzas. In this case, we have quatrains. Now, another hint when we look at a poem, always zoom in at the bottom. Usually, especially in the AQA anthologies, when I've just been looking through these recently at my school, the classes that I work with, we notice that a lot of the poems have 1 or 2 lines separated at the very end. Now there's a clear reason for this. That's the message of the poem. The writer wants to emphasize his point. So when there's a break in structure, where there is 1 line or 2 lines, usually at the bottom of the poem, this is to emphasize the point. So put near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. There's an acceptance of responsibility, that the trauma of war stays and haunts with the soldiers. Maybe that is the message that Simon Armitage wants to get across. So we look at the poem. Highlighted in green, probably armed, possibly not. Probably armed, possibly not. It's a cyclical structure. The line starts, or the poem starts, he's probably armed, he's possibly not, and that's repeated near the end. So cyclical structure. The beginning, we go in a full circle and we go back to where we started at the end. I swear, I see, but I blink and. Now I've highlighted them just before we read through it for the enjambment. Enjambment, when a line flows onto the next line, it becomes more of a story. However, the enjambment is used here from stanza to stanza. It's almost an acceptance, a dramatic pause, and I swear, I see every round. There's a thought there from the narrator. So we will read through this, but before we read through it, let's have a very quick look at the structure and the basics, then read the poem and analyse the stanzas. So the structure of the poem. There are 7 quatrains, a stanza of 4 lines. The 2 lines separated at the end to emphasise the point. He is tainted, the trauma will not go away. And the cyclical structure, the repetition of the line, probably armed, possibly not. So, very basics of poetry as well. Another thing that was drilled into me at university back in, believe it or not, 1996. We look for the pronouns. I. wherever we look at a poem. So straight away, first glance, we look at the shape, we look at how many lines are in each stanza. Is there anything like the red 2 lines at the bottom? I've highlighted the red, they're not really red, by the way. So as I scan through the poem, I see I see. Is there any more? I close my eyes. So the use of the personal pronoun I tells me immediately the poem is presented in the first person narrative. So if I am writing an essay question, one of the first things I might say is, in Remains by Simon Armitage, we are introduced to the first person narrator. The use of the personal pronoun I. Remains is presented in the first person narrative. We've mentioned that enjambment. It's a structural technique. It creates a flow, a story. If there's a first person pronoun I, if there's enjambment and we get that flow of a story, it becomes a monologue. What is a monologue? A monologue is a one person story. It's a drama technique. It's dramatic. It's a one person speech. Shakespeare utilizes monologues and soliloquies. Soliloquies, when a character speaks their thoughts out loud, the audience delve into the character's thoughts. So a soliloquy, speak your thoughts out loud. A monologue is a speech. So this is a first person narrative, the use of enjambment, the flow of the story, it becomes a monologue. And one more point on language before we actually delve deep into the lines and read the poem is there's no rhyme and structure, and there's lots of colloquial vocabulary. So this first person narrative, the monologue, the lack of rhyme, and the colloquial vocabulary. Colloquial vocabulary, how we talk. We talk differently depending on who we talk to. You might talk to the head teacher in a very different way you talk to your friends in a break time. You talk to your parents differently than you talk to your mates outside. Colloquial, how we talk in different places. I'm from Newcastle. People always say, why I, man? Well, that's what people always say, whether we say it or not, who knows. But the colloquial vocabulary, there's lots of that. It's relaxed. There's no pretense, there's no cover-up. It makes the poem come across as real. This is a real man, a real soldier. He's telling his story of events. So the basics are there, and we can look at these basics and use them when we analyse any poem. We look for the pronouns. If it said he is, she is, that's not first person, that's third person. And we have the third person omniscient narrator, where the narrator is a godlike character looking down on everyone. The poem is presented in the third person omniscient narrator. The poem is presented in the first person narrative. This is the first person narrative. Right, enough waffling, and let's read through the poem. So, it would be good if, just before we read, you have a copy of the poem, or you have a notepad. You can go over this video and pause, play back, or you can make notes and annotate the text as we go through it. So let's just have a full read through first. On another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind. So all three of us open fire. 3 of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear, I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of me mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body, and he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed, possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, and the drink and the drunks won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines. not left for dead in some distant sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, is bloody life in my bloody hands. So, when we read a poem, we try and put a bit of emphasis into it. We try and understand the lines. We don't want to read a poem, on another occasion we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank. So let's try putting emphasis. Let's read and let's think of the emotions and the thoughts of the poem. Right, straight to stanza 1. So, it immediately establishes the norm. There's a structural technique here. He says on another occasion. The poem structure starts in the middle of a story, in the middle of a scenario, on another. The word another implies this has happened time and time before and will happen time and time again. It is just the norm. It's regular. So immediately establishing this is becoming this horrific tragedy. Somebody's being killed in a horrific way. It's just another occasion. He says he legs it. Again, we mentioned that colloquial vocabulary. He legs it. How he normally talks, how the soldier normally talks. It emphasises the normality of the horrific scene. There's no kind of really thought to words to sum up this event. It's just normal talk. He's just talking as if it's a normal event. He legs it. The colloquial vocabulary makes the act seem less tragic than what it is. And then we have that, what we mentioned, the cyclical structure, the probably armed and possibly not. Probably, possibly. It's uncertain. It kind of emphasises the horrific act, that this was a person, the looter, he might not have been out to kill people. He was looting, a looter. He's robbing a shop. That's what looting means. He's robbing. He's taken from a shop. They've broken into a shop, and they're just taking as much as what they can. He's lost his life for that. Is that punishment? Does the punishment reflect the crime? And more so that they don't know if he's armed. He's probably armed, he's possibly not. Maybe you could argue they're taking no risks. It's in such a dangerous place they don't have time for risk. But it does emphasise the point that this could have just been somebody robbing a shop and have lost their life for that crime. So we have another, we have legs it, and then we have that probably armed, possibly not, and that's repeated again at the end. In the second stanza, now this stanza, it's all about blame and deflecting blame. Stanza 2 is about deflecting the blame. There's repetition. He says, and somebody else, and somebody else. We're all of the same mind. It brings that group together. So all 3 of us open fire, 3 of a kind. So we have somebody else and somebody else, 3 of. The repetition emphasises he doesn't want to take the blame. He deflects the blame to the group, not the individual. And again with the repetition of 3 of, repeated. It is, we are in this together. It was not a person, it was a group. There's also a second point to this. There's a lack of emotional connections. There's no names. He says, in one of the next stanzas, my mate. He throws him in the back of a cart. My mate, somebody else. So his mate is somebody else. There is no names. There's a lack of emotional connections. Is this Simon Armitage telling us a point of war, that there's no individuality, that there's no morals, there's no emotional connection? We are just beings and we are just doing our job. So they are there, the soldiers are there and they are doing their job. They are not individuals. And I swear, again, this colloquial, I swear, okay, but there's an enjambment here, and this links the 2 stanzas. The enjambment flows throughout the poem, but there is enjambment between stanza to stanza, and this, it shows a dramatic change of thought here. We go from somebody else, myself, all of a sudden we zoom in on the soldier with the personal pronoun I. There is an acceptance now. The stanza starts with a joint blame, and then the effects of the event, I. We get the personal effects through the use of the personal pronoun I. So he says, I swear, I see every round. This becomes a personal account now. There is a shift in realisation shown through the enjambment between the stanzas. I swear, I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So there's a shift from the ambiguity of someone else to the focus on I, and the repetition of the two lines, I see. It infers the soldier is starting to suffer. They're starting to realise the trauma of the event. And then at the end of the stanza, when he says sort of inside out, he's describing the body. He's unsure. He can't vocalise clearly. When he says he legged it earlier on, this soldier doesn't have the vocabulary. He can't vocalise clearly this horrific image, but it is a horrific image. He's sort of inside out. We don't really need a huge vocabulary and long sentence types. Just that phrase alone, sort of inside out, it creates a horrendous image of this looter's body on the floor. And then we move to stanza 4. Now this stanza, it reminds me of kind of the bin wagons outside. It reminds me of kind of images we see of the bubonic plague with the bodies being chucked on the carts. So the verb tosses his guts back into his body. Again, this kind of verb, it's colloquial language, tosses his guts back into his body. It implies there's no cares taken. This life is meaningless. The looter's life is it's the remains. Remains is in the title. Remains, you might put the remains from your dinner in the bin. Okay, remains are useless. It's meaningless. Got to remember, this looter is a person. He might have a family. He might be a father. He might be a son. He might be somebody's husband. And they are just treating it like it's rubbish. So he tosses his guts. Life is meaningless. The images of that bubonic plague, that there's no moral responsibility. There's no kind of, here's a body, let's wrap it up and let's pay respect to human life. This stanza tells me that the life is meaningless. There is no moral responsibility. And then it's carted off in the back of a lorry. This emphasises that point too. The body is waste. As in the title, remains, it's tossed in the back of a lorry. Creates a sense of waste disposal, not the removing of a human life. It asks the question, or it addresses the question, is there no humanity in war? It is rubbish, it is remains, get rid. On to stanza 5. So, end of story, except not really. His blood shadow stares on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink. Right, so this stanza tells how the deed is done, but it has not gone away. The event, the shooting, the body being carted off, that's all in the past, but it's still lingering on. The trauma is starting to haunt the soldier. He's starting to think of it. When it happened, it was matter of fact. Now, this seemingly meaningless act, it's lingering, it's staying, it's starting to eat away at him. Reminds me a little bit of Lady Macbeth. When Lady Macbeth is so matter-of-fact about killing the king, just kill the king. When she tells Macbeth just to clean his hands, this deed is starting to eat away. We know what it does to Lady Macbeth. Is it going to do the same to this soldier? He's home on leave. There's a shift on focus here. We have gone from the first 4.5 stanzas in Iraq, in a war zone, to now he's at home. The shift in focus. Armitage shifts the focus. We move from war in Iraq, we move to home. We've gone from a war zone to the peaceful fields. When we say home, what does the word home mean to us? Somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful. It reminds me of war photographer Carol Ann Duffy when she says the war photographer comes home, rural England, home again, ordinary pain. CAD means Carol Ann Duffy at the bottom there. We have that feeling from war to home. And both in war photography and in remains, there's that emphasis that you can't just shut off, you can't switch off what you've seen, you can't switch off what you've done, it will stay. Which leads us on to stanza 6. And he bursts again through the doors on the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. So we have that sleep and dream. There's a juxtaposition. The ease of the event, the event in the start of the poem, how matter-of-fact it was, it's not important. But at home, in this peaceful country, his sleep and his dreams are affected. Now this brings us on to Shakespeare. Now I've seen it mentioned, people mention Macbeth, but there's also this Hamlet link as well. These Shakespearean tragedies, these young men who suffer, and there is the Hamlet link and the Macbeth link. There's probably lots and lots of links if you study your Shakespeare. The Hamlet one, Hamlet says in a soliloquy, remember what we said about soliloquies? In one scene where he speaks his thought out, he says to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, for in the sleep of death what dreams may come. So Hamlet can't sleep, he's haunted. He says if he sleeps he dies, and that is similar, very similar to what he's saying here. Macbeth hears voices, sleep no more, Macbeth does murder sleep. So there are two Shakespearean characters that we could link to this stanza, the fact of sleep and dreaming, and how sleeping and dreaming becomes impossible. And we can't sleep and we can't dream because we are haunted by the acts of the past, so we turn to drink and drugs. But he says the drink and drugs won't flush. The verb flush, what does that verb tell us? If we flush the toilet. We flush out vermin. Flush is a verb we want rid of, we want to destroy, get rid of the dirt. And he's turned to drink and drugs, which implies the soldier, he can't deal with what he's seen. He is now unable to kind of that mental strength. He can't cope with what he's seen. He is now relying on substances and substance abuse, but even that will not get rid of the acts of what he's done. They are still there in his thoughts. So stanza 7. Again, this is further emphasizing that point. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant sun-stand, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand. So we get this war feel and theme again. Dug in behind enemy lines, left for dead. He's talking about the Iraq, the sun and the sand, the stunned and the smothered, the desert sand. So although he's at home now, he's still thinking of war. Remember that juxtaposition? When he was at war, everything seemed, the colloquial language, everything seemed so easy and matter of fact. But now he's at home, it's the wrong way around. When he was at war, should he have been thinking and worrying, dug in behind enemy lines? But he was quite relaxed when he was there. Maybe he's only alive when he's at war. And when he's at home, he can't cope with the struggles. Again, another link to a very famous story. In fact, it was made into a movie, I think, in 2018, 2019, when we look at Journey's End. And one of the main characters in Journey's End, this strong character, he has to rely on drink and drugs. He can't cope with actually what's going on at war. There is a pattern of this behaviour in soldiers. So although he's home, the language is very much still in a war, reflects the metaphor that the narrator is having an internal war with his memories. Now there's two other points in this stanza that jump off the page to me. The language. It says sun, stunned, sand, smothered. The use of adjectives, it creates an uncomfortable emotion. That stunned and smothered. To me, shock, can't breathe. You were stunned, an animal that's stunned and injured. Smothered, as if you're smothering and you can't breathe. It kind of makes the chest tight, makes you feel uncomfortable reading that. But there's a contrast. Sun and sand, quite nice, feels like a holiday. Stunned and smothered, they don't seem like they should go together. So it's kind of, there is the contrast of what we expect and the reality, this hardship. And then the final point, if we look over to the sibilants, a form of alliteration where we use S's. There are a pattern of S's that make a hissing sound. Sibilants, lots of S's. We could say alliteration, but the sibilance is correct. So the S sounds almost like a hissing sound. Now, to me, this is symbolic of a snake. The hiss, a snake, which is often linked to the devil and evil. Does this infer that the evil act has finally caught up with the soldier? That he is now in this hell? The sibilance, the hissing sounds of the devil. So if we look at it, in some distant sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, it has an evil sense, an evil feel to it. The sibilance creates a dark mood and the dark atmosphere of the poem. And then we come to the very end, stanza 8. The 2 lines. Remember what we said at the very beginning. 2 lines, 1 line at the end of the poem. Always look at the poem. Always look at the shape of the poem before we even read it. We look at the shape, then we look for the pronouns. The pronouns tell us the form and the structure of the poem, how it's being presented. But in stanza 8 we have 2 lines. And again, it links to Macbeth. There's a Shakespeare, there's a tragedy. All Shakespeare's tragedies, kind of that tragedy focus, it's tragic. Is it tragic for the looter? But it also implies it's tragic for the soldier as well. So at first we feel sorry for the looter. It's a horrendous act. He's killed. He's shot for stealing. And the soldiers don't seem to care. Somebody else and somebody else, and we just toss the body, the remains, onto the cart. But now we have this tragedy feel. But near to the knuckle. Near to the knuckle. The phrase, it's too close to the knuckle. It implies it's too close for comfort. It can't go away. If something's near to the knuckle, it's not going to go away. It's uncomfortable. It's too close for comfort. The structure stanza is 2 lines separate at the end. It emphasises the point. He is tainted. The trauma will not go away. But the Macbeth's theme, there's that Shakespeare tragedy links we've just mentioned. The phrase "blood on your hands," it's a metaphor. It won't leave him. He can't wash it away. Macbeth says, let's just say if I get this quote right, will all great Neptune's oceans wash this blood? Will all great Neptune's oceans wash this blood clean from my hands? So when Macbeth has killed the king, he comes back to Lady Macbeth and he's literally got blood on his hands, and he says, "I've got blood on my hands." He's speaking figuratively. He's speaking metaphorically. Blood on your hands implies he's killed someone, and Lady Macbeth says a little water will wash that off. And he says all Neptune's oceans won't wash this off. In other words, the deed is so horrendous, it doesn't matter what you do, this is going to stay with me forever. And that is what Simon Armitage is saying here on the poem. So he is tainted with the trauma, it will not go away, and that metaphor of the blood on the hands. Right, so we've covered language and structure. Quite a detailed video this. You can go onto the quick link, the quick wins, the videos I upload, where we just look at little specific skills, little ways of analysing poetry, answering English language questions and English literature questions. We focus on Macbeth, Inspector Calls, Blood Brothers, the language questions. There's lots of focuses. Please go through my channel, like and subscribe. Hope this has helped, and I hope you enjoy and watch some of my other uploads and videos. Thank you.